How's it going, David from Comic Book Investments? So this question has always plagued my mind many times. Why do artists all of a sudden suck as they get older? Now, here's a picture of Frank Miller's Wolverine. Back in the day, in the 1980s. Very good. Now, here is Wolverine now from Frank Miller. See the difference? Why is it so terrible? It's not like he can't draw anymore, but then he releases something like this of Sabretooth. Or let's not forget the Wonder Woman. Just very, very terrible drawings. And at one point they were good. Now, many people will come down to a couple different reasons. One of the reasons being age. Well, they just got older. But it also could be that maybe they're changing their style. Maybe artists go through like, I'm tired of doing the style. I want to change it a little bit and do something new and unique. That could be a reason. Or maybe their style, that the reason why they changed it this way is because they're lazy. That's probably also a possibility. But I don't think age is always a factor that a lot of people think it is. They're like, oh, they're just getting older. Now, it could be a factor if their health is deteriorating, such as, Joe Shuster, who famously created Superman, but he actually started going blind. He had some genetic disease or something where he just slowly went blind. He was actually fully blind by the time he was around 60 years old. So before that, it just got worse and worse, and he just couldn't really draw anymore and just kind of went downhill. But if you take Frank Miller, for example, look at this Batman that he did in the 80s. Now, at this point, Frank Miller was probably in his 40s when he did this, but look at his Batman now. And they all kind of are in the similar pose that he does. I think it's just like this where it's a front on and it's just like face on, and there's not really much going around in terms of background. I think that is laziness. I don't think Frank Miller is getting worse with age. I think he's just being lazy. He doesn't really want to try anymore. He just wants to do a front picture. He doesn't want more background stuff. That's more lines that you have to draw if you're drawing any background. So I'll just draw a picture. And he does, you ever go to like a convention, like Kevin Eastman, if you ever have him sign something, he does like a quick little turtle next to his name sometimes, like a little sketch. Lots of artists do this. Maybe Rob Liefeld will draw a little Deadpool face or a little Wolverine or something like that. It's almost like they do that because they just do it so often and it's really quick and easy for them to do and people like it. It's almost like Frank Miller is doing that, but for comic covers. It's like, oh, the same pose over and over, just a front-on picture, whether it's a thing, Sabretooth, Wolverine, who cares? Just real quick drawing. And they're definitely way uglier and just the art is just very, very bad. I think Frank Miller gets lazy. I don't think it's because of age. Because if you look at someone like Jim Lee. Jim Lee's style, although close to the same age, even when he was drawing these, like if you compare Jim Lee's like drawings, he's only a few years younger than Frank Miller. So if you go back a couple years ago on Frank Miller, it'd be the same as Jim Lee is today. Look at Jim Lee back in the day. Look at him now. He's just as good. Like maybe his style's changed a little bit, but I think it's even better. He's a better artist. Now you think, oh, Jim Lee, he's a one of a kind. Well, look at Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane, same age. Look at his art. I would say that maybe he's even gotten better as an artist in his age, which you would think as you get older, you would just get better. So I don't think that age really is a factor. I think it's laziness. Now look at Gil Kane. Gil Kane is famous for drawing Spider-Man and Green Lantern mostly. Look at his Showcase 22. Now he was in his 30s when he did this, compared to later in the 1980s when he was still drawing Green Lantern. Look how much worse it is. It's just ugly. The drawings aren't very attractive looking. The faces are just weird. It looks, when an artist draws something, they usually come up with a preliminary. This is kind of like a rough idea sketch where they want to take it. Now they might give that to an editor and the editor's like, cool, that's a cool cover, let's go with it. Or they just might want to just quickly sketch something just so they have an idea of like a very preliminary drawing. And that's what Gil Kane looks like. Later in his years, he looks like preliminary. So I don't want to hear this thing where it's his age, because age shouldn't be a factor. He's not like 90 or 100 years old drawing these pictures. He's in his 60s and 50s, and he's drawing these, and they're just not very good. I think it's laziness. I think he doesn't care. He doesn't care. So if you look at his Spider-Man from the 70s versus his Spider-Man years later, it's just not even the same. It's just roughly done. Just like the faces don't look good. Everything is like, ugh, it's like flat. Also, another artist that got lazy in his age was Neal Adams. Now, Neal Adams would still go to the comic conventions and was still present. So he wasn't. I didn't see his health really deteriorating like, maybe like a Joe Shuster or something like that. He was still out there drawing stuff, but his art just got bad. I mean, if you look at, Neal Adams was great on Batman, just a really great artist all around. And then look at him later in years on this cover that he did, and it's just like, just look at the faces. Ugh. Just really bad. Like, that's why I don't understand. It's like, why do always the faces look weird? And you put like muscle lines where they just look awkward. Like proportions are off, like muscle lines are not really lining up. And it just looks to me like these are all preliminary. Like, they just get lazy. They just don't care. And I mean, it's kind of sad. And I don't want to rip on all these artists because they're great artists all around, but I just want to understand how these people got to where they were, where they just don't care, and why some artists still do care. Like Jim Lee doesn't have to, he could easily phone it in. I mean, he's the president of DC Comics, but he doesn't. I mean, Todd McFarlane could easily phone in his stuff at any time, but it seems like he doesn't. So I don't think it has to do with age. A lot of people say it's because they got old. I don't think so. I think it's actually because they are just lazy is why. Now, some people will say, oh, maybe it's because they changed their style and, they want to do a new style. Similar to Kevin Eastman. I think Kevin Eastman has gotten worse, but not like super bad compared to the other ones. But I think he's just changing his style. And I'm trying to figure out if he's changing his style because of laziness, or if he's changing his style because he thinks it looks better. Now, art is in the eye of the beholder, and I really don't think it looks better. Now, you be the judge. Here's some old Kevin Eastman versus his new. To me, it looks like a preliminary still. Like, that's what it boils down to. And why don't artists change their style for the better? Like, where are the artists where it's like they're really good, and then they change their style in their late years, and they were actually, the new style was even better than the old style. It's always just worse. It's always the opposite. So my thinking with Kevin Eastman is not because he's getting older. I think he's just getting a little more lazy, but he's also changing his style. The Turtles look way different than they did before, and it's weird. A lot of times, like Frank Miller changed his style because he doesn't want to draw as much, so less lines. Like, that's why he doesn't do backgrounds and all this kind of stuff. It's just like, I'm gonna draw as little as possible, and not really add much in terms of detail if I don't have to. Kevin Eastman, he's adding in more detail, but it just doesn't look as good. That's the thing. So I think with Kevin Eastman is, in his case in particular, I think he's changing his style, but I think it's for the worse. I think it looks worse. I think he could still draw really well if he wanted to, but I think his style they changed to maybe is both a lack of not caring, and also, if I do it this way, maybe it's a little easier to draw, quicker to draw in the long run. But I think if push came to shove, he could probably draw much better if he really wanted to. Or maybe he just thinks that this new style this is what I like, this is what I'm going to draw. So I don't think age is a factor. I think the real factor is laziness, phoning it in, so to speak, and maybe a change of style. But I think a lot of times those artists will change their style, like Joe Kubert. He changed his style to be a more easy version of what he used to do. But the thing is, he can, when he wanted to, he could still bring it. Like, so if you look at some old Joe Kubert versus when he kind of got more lazy and just like, just got rough and just looked more preliminary. But then decades later, he came out with the Spider-Man, and I was like, okay, that's actually not that bad. It's actually better than what he was doing in like the 80s and things like that. And so I still think they could bring it if maybe it's they lost the desire and the luster, the want to do something good, the want, like in their 30s, they're like, oh, I got this, I'm doing Spider-Man or I'm doing Green Lantern or whatever they're doing, and they're like, I just want to make these awesome covers. And then after doing 100 different issues of them, they're like, I don't really care anymore. What is we're gonna do this? And that's okay, sure, why not? And they don't care. Like, Joe Kubert is famous for doing war covers, like Sergeant Rock, things like that. And so he's probably done hundreds of Sergeant Rock covers, let alone interiors and all that kind of stuff. And so he's just probably just like, whatever. Like, I don't really care to make these covers cool anymore. I don't really care. But then maybe come back around and like, hey, did you want to draw Spider-Man? I was like, oh, well, I've never really drawn Spider-Man before, so maybe I'll try a little harder. So let me know what you think. I am going to go with that barring the fact that some people probably have ailments and the reason why, maybe it's blindness, their hands don't work anymore, things like that. I mean, you look at Alex Ross and, he's still, he's older, but not super old, but he still knocks it out of the park. There's a lot of artists that can just knock it out of the park, and age is not a factor at all. They actually might even get better with age. And then there's some artists that are they just get way worse. Let me know what you think it is. Tell me some artists down below that you think got worse with age, and tell me some artists that got better with age. Like, you're like, oh, they in their 20s and 30s, they were pretty good, but then, man, once they hit their 60s, they were like phenomenal. And obviously, art is in the eye of the beholder, but I'm going to go with laziness. And I think they do change their style, but they do change their style to make it easier and more lazy on them, especially Frank Miller. I mean, he's the most egregious. It's definitely, you look at it and like, that's a Frank Miller. Like, I can tell that's a Frank Miller drawing, but it looks ugly and it looks terrible. And I understand there's this, as an artist, sometimes you want to be thought-provoking. When you see this art, you're like, ugh, but it makes you talk about it. It makes you share it on social media, makes you go the rounds and all that kind of stuff. So maybe there's like some element to that, right? As an artist, you're like, I want people to think more deeply. But I think in Frank Miller's case, he's like, this is ugly. And people are going to say, you were great. Why is it so ugly now? Let me talk about it online, so share it. And I think it comes down to he's just lazy. That's what I think. All right. Have a great day.